the wash.
Okay.
And she's been unresponsive.
We didn't know where else to take her. There's no hospital near here. They're like stacked out right between here. That's it. All right.
New documents from the Arizona Department of Child Safety reveal a decade-long trail of chilling details leading up to the death of 10-year-old Rebekah Baptiste. And this is raising questions about what more could have been done to protect this little girl from what prosecutors describe as horrific torture. We are going to break down the multiple reports and explain how it ended this way. And we're going to do it all with a former child abuse prosecutor who knows the ins and outs of this system. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We've been following this horrible story of Arizona 10-year-old Rebekah Baptiste, whose life ended after what prosecutors described as prolonged and maybe some of the worst abuse we have documented here on Law&Crime Sidebar. Because now, new documents from the Arizona Department of Child Safety reveal a history of prior concerns, alleged neglect, maybe even missed opportunities to protect her. Maybe after hearing this, you will make that argument, you will feel that way. And this apparently stretches over a decade. According to the reports, Rebekah and her siblings were the subject of multiple calls to DCS over the years, citing physical abuse, neglect, unsafe living conditions. Many of these allegations were deemed unsubstantiated. There were others that led to temporary removals and dependency cases, but ultimately, the children were returned to their father. And the latest documents also show that at the time of Rebekah's death, some of these investigations were still ongoing. We obtained these reports. We're going to get into these details, but first, for anyone who hasn't been following this case, here's a quick recap. So prosecutors say Rebekah's life was marked by prolonged abuse at the hands of her father, 32-year-old Richard Baptiste, and his 29-year-old girlfriend, Anicia Woods. She was found unresponsive on the ground near a highway intersection on July 27th, and tragically died from these injuries 3 days later on July 30th. That is what authorities are alleging. Now, investigators say that Rebekah had been living in this remote home with her father in Woods, and she had apparently run away multiple times. The body cam footage from first responders, it is so hard to watch because it paints a grim picture of what they encountered at this scene.
They found her in the wash.
Okay.
And she's been unresponsive.
We didn't know where else to take her.
Who's her parents?
Right here. Oh, sorry.
No, she ran away. She's on medications. And she hasn't been on these medications in about a month.
How long has it been since you found her unresponsive?
We don't know. The neighbor brought her.
When did the neighbor bring her?
It's 11:48. It had to have been probably close to 11.
Did she have any signs of life when she got brought to you?
She was almost basically like this. She was slightly responsive. She was still breathing on her own. And then as we were driving this way, started seeing color change in her lips, and we were just hauling it.
And you can watch the rest of that dramatic body cam footage in one of our previous episodes of Sidebar. So Rebekah was rushed to a medical facility and she died 3 days later. And investigators, they documented extensive injuries, including bruising in multiple stages of healing, missing toenails, signs of both physical and sexual abuse. Richard Baptiste initially claimed the injuries were accidental, but apparently allegedly admitted to using excessive force. Woods reportedly showed minimal concern for Rebekah's condition, despite claiming experience as a certified nursing assistant. And now, both Baptiste and Woods face first-degree murder and child abuse charges. They were initially held without bond, though a judge later set a $1 million bond for each of them. The case, by the way, just raises serious questions about prior reports to the Arizona Department of Child Safety, which had been reportedly contacted multiple times before Rebekah's death. And this brings us to the latest developments, the official DCS reports that detail allegations of neglect, abuse, and unsafe conditions that go back 10 years. We are going to break all this down. To help me do that, I want to bring on a special guest, practice professor of law and former child abuse and sex crimes prosecutor, Marian Braccia. Thank you so much for coming on. It's always good to see you. From your experience, how typical is it for a child welfare agency like DCS to receive multiple reports over, a decade without substantiated findings, even in cases that tragically result in a death? Because I think a number one question a lot of people have is, obviously, whatever happened here, could it have been prevented? Could they have stepped in? Could something have been done? What's your take on this?
So I don't have statistics on nationwide statistics, or certainly statistics from Arizona specifically on the number or the rate of reporting that's done to DCS, and then eventually if there are fatalities that result. What I will say is that in cases like this, and in cases of severe child abuse, it is rare that there be no documented history with DCS or with a Department of Welfare for child safety. And so the fact that there is such a robust and documented history of concerns being expressed, of reports being made, of essentially calls for help to DCS from school officials is not uncommon. I think what unfortunately is uncommon or singular and tragic in this case is the fact that, of course, a fatality resulted.
All right, so this is definitely a story that we wanted to bring to you, and the reason we can do that is because of the amazing support that we get from our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury law firm. This is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they have so many? Because they win a lot. They have recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, listen to this, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. Out in Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million. That was after being offered only $500,000. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not just start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. And in this case, in the Rebekah Baptiste case, there were these prior allegations that were deemed unsubstantiated, but you had others that led to temporary removals, dependency cases. How do we think about that? How should prosecutors, how should child welfare officials, how do they interpret unsubstantiated findings? I mean, what does that tell you?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is something that is a matter of statute. So that's not necessarily something that prosecutors would have any input on, or prosecutors would have any decision-making authority on. So DCS is regulated by certain statutes and by guidelines that dictate that child removal from a home or from parental supervision is a means of last resort. It is something that can only be done if there is clear and imminent danger to the child, if there is an ongoing risk of harm, of ongoing abuse to the child that is present, that is imminent. And so there is a standard that needs to be met to find that those claims are substantiated, not just that a report was made. Unfortunately, not even if there is evidence that there is bruising or there is injury that is healing, it needs to be a present danger to the child. And according to the DCF records, every time caseworkers went out and responded to the reports and checked on the children, there was not a present danger happening. Now, of course, an argument can be made that there is ongoing abuse, then the child lives in present danger.
And by the way, there is this idea that you want to make sure that you keep the family intact as much as possible, and you don't want to interfere unless you absolutely have to, right?
I think that is the philosophy behind the guideline, yes.
Now I want to talk about this legal case. So Richard Baptiste, Anicia Woods, they now face first-degree murder charges, child abuse charges, and from a prosecutorial standpoint, could these prior DCS reports, these unsubstantiated allegations, could they be used at trial? Could they factor into proving intent, recklessness, knowledge, whatever have you? Could it actually come in?
I think maybe. The quintessential law school professor answer is it depends. So we ordinarily think about any case, any incident, whether we're in criminal court prosecuting someone or civil court where two private citizens are suing each other. We think about those cases as just case specific, as this particular incident. And we don't want to go to all corners of the earth to talk about other incidents. It's called other acts evidence. There are specific circumstances and specific exceptions that apply in the rules of evidence that will allow for that other act evidence be considered by the fact finder. In this case, as you mentioned, the fact that there might be evidence of intent, might be evidence of preparation or plan or absence of mistake to show that whatever happened to Rebekah was not accidental, it was in fact intentional, and to show that she had been traumatized, harmed, physically abused in a certain way over a period of time goes to show that there was no mistake or accident in this particular case, that it was actually an intentional injury inflicted that resulted in the death.
So let's dive into this. Let's dive into these reports, because as we can clearly see straight from the Arizona Department of Child Safety, this was not the first time that DCS had been involved with this family. According to the documentation that was obtained by Law&Crime, the very first report came on August 29, 2015, alleging neglect by Rebekah's parents, citing concerns about the condition of the home, possible drug use. However, I will tell you, the report notes, quote, the DCS investigation did not result in evidence to support the allegation. The allegation was unsubstantiated. And according to DCS, that case was still open when a second report came in on May 5th, 2016, claiming Rebekah had a severe diaper rash and an ear infection. And DCS again says they found no supporting evidence and referred the family to support services, closing that case a week later. Then you go to October 31st, 2017, another report alleged a 10-month-old child was left alone for several hours. DCS noted the family was provided a list of community resources and daycare, which they declined. So that case was later closed as well. And then finally, there was a substantiated intervention, an instance where DCS actually removed the children from the home. And we're going to get there. But first, Professor, now that I've kind of laid out a little bit more detail, what are your thoughts on this? How, when you see multiple reports here, I know they're limited in what they can do, but anybody watching this is going to say, I don't get it.
And I think that reaction is perfectly reasonable. And I think that it goes against common sense to hear all of these instances of third-party actors being so concerned that they're picking up the phone and calling DCS and saying that there is something amiss in this household. This child is not safe. This child is not being cared for. And repeatedly, these reports are being found unsubstantiated. So I think your listeners would be reasonable to say something was amiss. Someone missed something pretty significant here. But again, DCS is going to rest on the language in their statute and the language in their governing regulations that say that the danger to the child needs to be imminent and present. And those factors, according, again, to their caseworkers, were missing in this case.
So after 4 years of reports, right, from 2015 to 2019, there was no meaningful intervention that actually occurred. Now, that changed on March 14, 2019, when, according to the report, Rebekah and her siblings were removed from the home following allegations that Rebekah's birth mother had exposed a child to substances during pregnancy. And it is important to note here that Anicia Woods, Baptiste's girlfriend, was not Rebekah's birth mother. Okay. But a dependency petition was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court, and services were provided to the family. And this process eventually led to Richard Baptiste being granted full custody of the children in 2022, with the children reunited with their father, and the dependency cases were dismissed in 2023 and 2024. Now, by the way, we're actually talking about something happening here, Professor. So when you have a substantiated intervention, you're talking about removal. How does that work exactly? What should we be thinking about that?
So it is a very high level intervention. So we're talking about taking children away from their home, taking children away from their parents, either their biological parents or their legal guardians. And it is not a permanent removal, certainly. I believe in Arizona, the removal period is 72 hours to do an investigation of the home, to have the children placed in emergency placement with a licensed foster home or foster site. And so there is always, and frankly, more likely the possibility that after that 72-hour evaluation that the children will be returned to their home, the place from which they were removed. But if there is a finding after that 72-hour period that the home is not safe to go back to, that if the children were to be returned, that the danger would be present and ongoing, then the children can be more permanently placed in foster care.
So then you go to 2023, and the report shows the first claims involving Baptiste's girlfriend, Anicia Woods. And it's starting in November 2023. Reports began surfacing alleging that Woods had scratched a child on the neck. However, the DCS investigation determined that allegation, again, unsubstantiated. According to the report, community supports were provided to the family and all other services were declined by the family. So just real quick, Professor, they don't have to take services, right? And is that not a warning sign? If they're being offered, if there's an allegation that something's going on, they offer them services, they decline those services, that can't be I don't know what the best way to say it, that can't be used against them? That can't be evidence to remove the children or anything of that nature?
To remove the children, unfortunately, I think not. In a courtroom during this prosecution, it probably could, to be shown that there was every opportunity to avail themselves of services, of assistance, of help, of social services that perhaps were needed in this household, and they specifically chose not to, and to continue disciplining the children in a particular way, or caring or not caring for the children in a particular way. So I think that in terms of the homicide prosecution, it is actually pertinent there. I'm not sure it can be so used against them in terms of DCS's actions.
Then you go to February 13th, 2024. Okay, so DCS received another report alleging abuse by Anicia Woods, and that investigation too was deemed unsubstantiated and the case was closed. Now, later that year, September, October 2024, there were new reports that emerged alleging physical abuse and neglect, specifically that Rebekah had marks on her hands and her feet and that the children were being disciplined through exercise. Once again, DCS found no evidence to support the allegations. According to the report, the DCS investigation did not result in evidence to support the allegation. The allegations were unsubstantiated. The case closed on November 18th, 2024. Professor, I'm not trying to cast blame here, but I have to ask, have there been lawsuits, has there been legal action taken against Child Protective Services in the past? I'm not saying that's what should happen here. I'm not saying they're at fault, just asking the question.
Oh, there certainly have been, Jesse. There certainly have been. I don't know about Arizona specifically. It is entirely possible to sue a social service agency civilly. So the estate or the survivors of Rebekah Baptiste would certainly be within their right to investigate legal action or cause of action against DCS. I know very specifically in Pennsylvania, a heartbreaking case from almost a decade ago involved a young girl, a 14-year-old girl named Danielle Kelly, and the social workers from our Department of Human Services who were supposed to be caring for her essentially falsified their records and were not checking on her, were not ensuring that she was being fed and cared for medically. She was 14 years old and she was 42 pounds when she died. And those two social workers were prosecuted and convicted of involuntary manslaughter. So it is entirely possible for there to be both civil and criminal remedies when it comes to the neglect of social services.
I'm glad you clarified that. Yeah, I'm glad you expanded upon that. I'm not saying that's what should happen here, but when you're looking at these multiple reports and at least one instance where there was a substantiated intervention, I'm just wondering. Now, we go to January 16th, 2025, okay, so a few months ago. And there was a report alleging that Richard Baptiste had made Rebekah run as punishment without, by the way, bathroom or water breaks. And on May 19th, 2025, Woods was alleged to have spanked Rebekah and her siblings. So DCS attempted to engage the family, but they lost contact when they moved to Concho, Arizona. And that investigation was still ongoing when Rebekah's injuries, which would eventually, according to prosecutors and law enforcement, be fatal, were reported on July 27, 2025. Following Rebekah's death, DCS took immediate action, saying, following an assessment of child safety, the other children were removed and placed in a licensed foster home. A joint investigation was conducted with the Apache County Sheriff's Office. The department continues to provide services to Rebekah's siblings. Well, I guess, Professor, that was the time they needed to. I mean, after something like this happens, they had no choice, but at the same time, it's, I don't know. What do you make of that response?
It is certainly troubling, to say the least, right? I think, though, that what DCS, again, would rest on is that, listen, these are the statutes, these are the regulations that we are governed by. And if there is to be any change in what we can do in terms of removal, in terms of intervening more aggressively, in terms of having more aggressive contact with the family when there is a report that comes through, then these regulations and these statutes need to be amended, and they need to be amended administratively, they need to be amended legislatively. But right. Until that time, DCS will always claim that they are bound by their governing rules.
And two challenges that I wonder here are, one, how do DCS officers, do they know, hey, something is discipline, something is parenting versus something's abuse, right? Maybe exercise there could be a benign reason for that. And two, if you have a family that relocates, I'm sure that's a complicating factor as well.
I think you're right on both those counts. I think there is plenty of case law out there that distinguishes between corporal punishment as child discipline and when it rises to the level of abuse. I think in this instance, there was a documented interview with the father. He did admit to hitting Rebekah with a belt, but it wasn't supposed to do the harm that it did. It wasn't supposed to leave such deep bruises as it did. And so he acknowledges that he was using the belt for discipline, but it may have crossed the line. So an instance like that is a good example of how states do recognize that parents are within their rights to discipline children as they see fit. And if that means in certain families that corporal punishment is accepted, the states are respectful of that decision, but are always mindful that corporal punishment can always cross the line into abuse very quickly.
Now, in response to Rebekah's death, the Arizona Department of Child Safety issued the following statement. In the wake of this tragedy, the department is working closely with law enforcement to ensure that those who committed this heinous act are held fully accountable. The team is conducting a review of Rebekah's case to determine what factors may have affected the outcome of this case. While no action can undo this devastating loss, we will continue to strengthen our efforts, learn from this tragedy, and honor Rebekah's memory by keeping our commitment to protecting the children of Arizona. And DCS also described its process, its limitations when responding to an allegation of abuse or neglect. The department first determines if the child is in present danger. Present danger is something that is observable, out of control, and happening in the present moment that makes the child unsafe without immediate intervention. The immediate intervention could be one of several options to control the safety threat, with removal being the last and most extreme option. If the child is not in present danger, the department, through its investigation, determines if the child is in impending danger. This means they're likely to be unsafe again in the near future without intervention. State law provides that the department can only take custody of a child for up to 72 hours. A finding may be substantiated without a removal. This means that the department has evidence to believe, by a preponderance of the evidence, that something occurred that meets the definition of abuse or neglect, but that the taking of temporary custody was not required in order to keep the child safe. And this is exactly what we have been talking about the limitations, about what the guidelines are. Now, per reporting from KTVK, Maricopa County Prosecutor Rachel Mitchell apparently told reporters she is outraged over the way that this case was handled, and her office is investigating this.
I'm talking about what information came in, who was it given to, what steps did they take. I mean, I'm talking a step-by-step analysis of what happened and what the breakdown was here. And it's really only then, once we have that thorough understanding of where the breakdown was, that we can start to fix it. I don't want to start to fix something when I don't know exactly what was broken. Clearly something was broken.
Now, meanwhile, Rebekah's school, Empower College Prep, which was responsible for making these calls, they issued the following statement. The question remaining before us is, what is the department willing to change in its policies, criteria, and procedures to ensure that when multiple mandated reports are made, they are acted on with urgency, consistency, and adequate follow-through? So according to school officials, they reached out a dozen times to CPS about the Baptiste family. And as for Richard Baptiste and Anicia Woods, they face first-degree murder charges, child abuse charges. There's a preliminary hearing scheduled for September 4th in Apache County. Professor, before we wrap things up, what do you think about their charges, their legal case?
Well, I think that's probably a follow-up conversation, and maybe we'll have that after the preliminary hearing. But without information on the specific cause of death, without information on who had access to the child before she went missing, before her body was found, and what the condition of the body was afterwards, I don't think well equipped enough to address the strength of the charges against them. I think the fact that these are two equal caregivers will certainly go in favor of the prosecution, but we need to know the specifics of the date, time, and location of how the eventual fatality occurred.
Fair enough. Professor Marian Braccia, thank you so much for taking the time. Good seeing you.
Thank you. Same to you.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.